Welcome to Washington Times Higher Ground. I want to get into a number of topics with you today. You have a new book out, When It's Your Turn to Serve. We'll talk about that. But I want to first start with faith because right now in America, I think we're experiencing a little bit of a faith crisis. We're seeing people walk away, but we're also seeing these moments that some people are calling revival. We're seeing mass baptisms. We're seeing more interest, I think, in finding an alternative to what culture is putting out there. And one of the things that has defined your family in many ways has been faith. And so I would love to start with your testimony because I don't actually know your testimony, your introduction into faith. Would love for you to take us through some of that.
Well, thank you, Billy. Thanks for having me on. You know, I- my faith is kind of interesting how it evolved. My mom remarried when I was about 11, and she married a Catholic man. And we started going to Catholic church and Catholic school. And I was fascinated by learning all about the Catholic faith. And I really have always had a very deep, deep faith. But when I was in the eighth grade, I wanted to be baptized. And um, I asked to be dropped off at school early, and I would go to the chapel and I would pray. And I always felt like I had this deep connection to God. But the interesting thing is, when I started dating Mike, and I tell this story actually in the book. Several of his friends were asking him questions like, "Is she a Christian? Is she a Christian? Is she a Christian?" And it really bothered me because I felt very judged by them. And I asked him, "What are they talking about? Like, why are they asking you that?" And he said, "Well, I think they're really just asking, have you given your life to Jesus Christ? Like, have you given him everything?" And that's kind of the definition of a Christian is when they totally choose to follow Christ. And I said, "Well, I wasn't really raised that way. I was kind of raised, don't bother God with too much, you know. You can ask him for the big things, but he doesn't want to know about your day to day." And I said, "If you can show me in the Bible where it says that." So Mike and I started reading the Bible and I started listening to contemporary Christian music. And I really feel like that was a time when I kind of rededicated my life to Christ.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find really interesting is your family has been through many iterations of politics, Congress, governor, vice president, running for president. And no family, nobody's perfect. We're all sinful, we all have sin, but yet, it's really phenomenal to watch your children carry the faith on that you were able in the midst of so much to continue and hold on to that faith tradition and teach it to your children. And I know for a lot of parents today, that's a struggle they have. They're sort of looking out and they're watching the cultural dynamic and they're saying, how in the world do I raise children who will love Jesus later on? And I know that's a big question and nobody has all the answers, but you seem to have been able to do that. So how did you do that in the midst of, politics and the crazy and busy lives that you were leading?
Well, Billy, I would say I did it on my knees. Honestly, I mean, I prayed for those kids, still do every single day, whatever struggles they're dealing with. And, we raised our kids to kind of have that faith foundation when they were young. They all went to public high school, and I would say that's when they kind of started to let go of their faith. Definitely when they went to college was a time when they all kind of, I don't want to say dumped their faith, but they started questioning things and kind of making their faith their own. And during that time, as a parent, of course you're anxious, but we let them know that, your faith has to be yours. So you have to figure out what you believe and if you want to follow Jesus or if you don't. And that's your choice and we will always be here to love you no matter what decision you make. And showing them that unconditional love kind of represents, the love of the Lord for us and just letting them know we're here if we can help you on this journey, but we're grateful that all of our kids now are walking with God, I would say, and married to great spouses and living wonderful lives. But, we've had our ups and downs as well in our family. So I think every family goes through those moments.
Yeah, and that is an amazing way to parent, I think, and to approach faith, because faith has to become your own, right? It has to Every child has to come to a place where we all had to do it in our lives, where it's not our parents' faith, where it's our faith. And more broadly though too, I think you and your husband have modeled what it means to live out trust. And you look at the book's title, When It's Your Turn to Serve, experiencing God's grace in his calling for your life. That word calling really stands out because you have both followed your calling. Your kids have watched that, and it's taken you to places I imagine you never thought you would end up. What did it take for you and for your husband to get to a place where you really could say, "Okay, God, I'm going to follow what you have for me, not just what I have for myself"?
Well, you know what? I don't think it's like there was a point where I could say, okay, now we are trusting God with everything and following Him with everything with a smile on our face. I think it's a day to day thing, Billy. Don't you? I mean, it's
Yeah.
every day we'll have a struggle or a doubt or a question. And I think, there are times where we actually kind of remind ourselves, okay, we're not trusting God in this decision, or we're not trusting God in that journey, or with this child or that decision. And it's we have to constantly remind ourselves that God is still in control. He is on his throne. And when you stop in the busyness of the day to day and remind yourself, okay, I don't have to run the world. I don't have to run my kids' lives. I just have to trust God, and I just have to ask Him what He wants me to do today and listen to that still small voice.
Yeah, and the small things, the big things. Obviously, I know every time there's been a moment where your husband and you were contemplating a run, whether it's for president right now or any other run, you would go to God with that and trust. And you ended up serving as Second Lady of the United States, which is a really interesting role to be in. What were some of the biggest joys of that role, which you obviously discuss many of them in the book?
I do. I talk about a lot of them in the book, and they're great stories. I hope your followers will get the book and read these stories because they were fascinating. It's interesting. I had very specific initiatives. I wanted to raise up the profession of art therapy, and so I traveled the world and talked to art therapists and told their story and saw art therapy working with our veterans and children with cancer. It was a fabulous initiative, so inspiring. And then I started working with military spouses, and I wanted to do what I could to help them. This was before our daughter even was a military spouse. But I knew that our veterans, there are lots of causes for our veterans and lots of causes for the military, but I felt like the military spouse was sometimes left behind. And there were things that we actually were able to accomplish to help them, especially with licensing issues. And then I also was asked to be the ambassador for Prevents. This is the president's roadmap to empower veterans and end the national tragedy of suicide. I also took up the cause of the honeybee, and we had a beehive installed at the vice president's residence. But my favorite thing, and actually, when we wrote the book, the publisher, the editor, they all would come back to me and say, "Okay, you meant one of the favorite things," and I kept saying, "No, no." I wrote it as the favorite thing that I did was actually going to the Special Olympics World Games. And I was asked to lead the delegation to the Winter Games and the Summer Games. And I just have to tell you, these young people were so inspiring. When I went to Austria for the Winter Games, it was freezing rain. Now, just imagine if you had trained for the Olympics in skiing and you get to Austria and it's time for your event and there's very little snow because it is freezing rain. most of us would just be so discouraged and angry and upset and frustrated. But I have to tell you, these athletes were not that way at all. They were so joyful. They were so happy to be there. They were so encouraging to each other. And when my whole delegation, when we went to the closing ceremonies, it again was freezing rain. They were walking out onto the stage with these clear parkas over all of their national colors and raising their hands and singing and clapping and laughing. And we all were just moved to tears, thinking, they're not going to let this dampen their spirits. They are so joyful to be here. They're making great friends. They're having a wonderful time. And so I tell people all the time that truly was the moment that I seem to remember the most when people say, "What did you really enjoy about being second lady?"
That's amazing. I love when there's a moment like that that really stands out. And it's funny that the publisher was saying, you mean one of the moments? And you're like, no, this is the moment.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a big event, but it's those little things in the event, seeing that gratitude and that excitement in the midst of that difficult moment. That's really powerful. Yeah, I have to pivot in and ask you, after being second lady, obviously a lot of chaos followed the last election. At the end of that, how hard was it to make that decision? How resistant were you to say, okay, we're not done here. We're going to run for the presidency. What was that like to kind of come to that conclusion?
Well, you would think that I would have thought this might be something we would consider, but honestly, Billy, I just immersed myself in our new life. We bought a home in Indiana. We've had three granddaughters. I mean, we've had so much fun. Mike started a policy foundation in Washington, and we've been speaking, both of us, really around the world. And we've just had a lovely, lovely couple of years. And when we started kind of seeing, okay, this things are not good in our country right now. And Mike started approaching me and saying, I feel like, I have the qualifications with all of my experience. I think we need to consider this. Honestly, it was surprising to me because I felt like, wait, I've given 20 years. Okay. I've given enough. I've done enough. And so you know what? I don't feel called to this at all. And I really resisted it. And our son-in-law, who is the Navy pilot, he said, "Well, what are the things that you're concerned about, or why are you resisting?" And so I listed some of the things that maybe I wasn't so excited about, and then he said, "But what are the things that you are excited about?" And my daughter-in-law actually said, she calls me Kiki. She said, "Oh, Kiki, but remember when you were second lady, you had many more things you wanted to do." She said, "If you were first lady, think of the things you could accomplish. Think of the good that you could do. I know it's a sacrifice, but think of what you could accomplish." And I was so surprised to see one of my son-in-laws, and the other son-in-law was just as supportive, to see them so supportive. And I actually started thinking, okay, it's probably a good thing that Jesus didn't say that about me, that he
Mhm.
didn't say, "You know what, Karen Pence, I've done enough for you and I'm done." And I thought, God has prepared Mike for this moment. And having served in the Congress and been a leader in the Congress and really been a fighter in the Congress, that a lot of people don't know what a fighter he is. And then to be a governor of Indiana, we had so many great things happen then. And then to be vice president. He likes to say, I would be ready on day one. I would know what to do and I would know who to do it with. But I still wasn't there. And so we started in January, Billy, reading the Bible. We have a 1 year Bible, where it has the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Psalms. And you read it every day. And we just started reading through the Bible on January 1st and praying together every single morning. Even when we're traveling, this morning we got together at 6:45 and did our Bible reading and our prayer. And that has made us so unified, as a couple. And we're seeing, some of the stories in the Bible where people experienced a lot of the things that we've experienced, and they have been maligned and they have been misunderstood and they have, had people attacking them. And it really helped me to come to that point. It was around Easter where I said, you know what? I I think I'm there. I think I'm there. I think I want to do this. I think I want us, just like we did before, step out and see what God wants to do with this. I don't know if he'll have us win or even win the nomination, but I know that he's using us in a mighty way. We actually heard the story of a county chairman in one of the states we've been campaigning in who decided to give his life to Christ because
Wow.
of our testimony. And so I don't know what the purpose is for this, but I know that we are where we're supposed to be.
You gave me chills a little bit on that because, we often think in life, you have sort of this end goal and like that's where we have to go, that's where we need to end up. But sometimes the journey, even if it doesn't end up at that end goal, I mean, having somebody give their life, that's already worth it, right? That's
Already worth
somebody,
it right there. Yep.
right? I mean, and I'm sure there are others too. What did it feel like to hear that? Because that to me is just so incredible.
It really was incredible, and, honestly, it just kind of struck us both, I mean, we get wonderful comments all the time on the campaign trail, people who say, "We're praying for you," or, "I love your testimony here, or your witness there," but to actually hear, that this person told one of our staff people, "After seeing Mike and Karen Pence and seeing their relationship, I've decided to give my life to Jesus," was just unbelievable. Just, humbling to think that God is using us in such a mighty way.
It's amazing. And, obviously there's the race for the presidency. You also have the book, When It's Your Turn to Serve. And, talking about God's calling and service. And, this is another touch point for people to see not, obviously the gospel and truth, but to also get a lens behind what it was like for you to be second lady, those initiatives you were mentioning. What is your big hope for this book? What do you want people to walk away with?
Well, when people read this book, they're going to be inspired. This is not a tell all, trash anybody book. This is a book meant to inspire the reader, to try and listen for where God might be calling them. And I tell stories in there too, Billy, where people told me, "Oh, we need you to do this and we need you to do that." And I said, I don't feel called to that. That is not my ministry right now. And I turned a lot of things down. And so I talk a little bit about that too, that just because something sounds good doesn't mean that's something you need to get involved in. Doesn't need to become your 25th ministry so that you're exhausted all the time. So it's I'm very careful about that, but I want the reader when they read this book, and the friends of mine and family members who have read it have said, "Oh my gosh, I feel so uplifted. I feel so inspired and there's so much good in the book." And that's something Mike and I tell people all the time. You'll hear him on the campaign trail say, "You know, my opinion of the American people as we've campaigned for so many years has only gone up because when you hear the stories that are in the book and see some of the things that happened that I was given the privilege to be a part of, it's so inspiring to know there are some great people out there in America, humble people, people serving, people who are unselfish and humble, not arrogant, but just wanting to do what they can for the good of the nation. And you'll hear those stories all through my book, and we see that every day on the campaign trail.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time today, coming on the show, talking with us. Would love to have you back again sometime soon.
Thank you, Billy. This was a privilege. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.